One of the risks that every investor confronts is whether the dollars he converts into a foreign currency, be it the Mexican peso or the Russian ruble, will hold their value. The worth of a country's currency, its money, is crucial to every global transaction and to every country's prosperity. So the global financial system, through its treasury secretaries, finance ministers, and central bankers, constantly argues about the value of currencies.
The instability of currencies, fluctuating dramatically, whether it's yen, dollar, or dollar Deutschmark, or the ringgit, or the baht, or the ruble, makes what I call the poker game in the sky. And almost nobody sees it clearly, and very few people even know that it's going on. And it's played among governments, and almost all of it is done in private.
The combat of currencies, their continually changing value, is one of the reasons global speculators like George Soros, or Tiger Management, or so-called hedge funds can make billions of dollars with one smart bet.
The short fund. He's talking about changing rates, guys. He said he's prepared to change rates.
The George Soroses and the hedge funds and big banks make a regular, profitable practice of looking at that poker game and saying, I think they've got it wrong. They can't keep that relationship that's developed between the baht and the dollar, or between the yen and the Deutschmark or whatever. So I'm going to play off that imbalance that they're stuck with and wait for them to collapse, or wait for them to quit the game and let the currency fall, or whichever.
The foreign exchange rates are up in this little corner with the dollar against the yen.
Robert Johnson is a former top portfolio manager for Soros Fund Management, a private fund whose minimum required ante is $250,000.
You're looking at electronic screens. When I watch my children, they're playing Nintendo or Sega or Pokemon or whatever the current game is, it's analogous. There's an electronic screen. At some level, the video game is like a virtual reality. You're playing with this game and with your imagination. In essence, you're not out in the field experiencing the changes in employment and agricultural harvests and things like that. You're looking at a distillation of all the indicators about that process over an electronic screen. You're removed from the actual economy while trying to interpret the economy through electronic means.
I still think we buy them somewhere in between.
In today's hot-wired financial markets, modern technology means traders can move money anywhere in the world at lightning speed. More than $1.5 trillion every day.
We pay on 11, no better than that. And like I said, it's $2 billion. Okay.
You spend almost all your time, even some of your dreaming time, thinking of things that could hurt you and how you would react. How am I going to react if this happens? Or, alternatively, what can I imagine that could happen that could hurt me that I haven't thought of yet? When I sit at the pool on Saturdays with my kids, sometimes they think I'm not there because in my mind, I'm off playing these scenarios through in my mind. And it's all about trying to stay a couple steps ahead and anticipate what's coming up.
A speculator makes money by betting on how a currency will move. If his bet is that it will fall, that play is called shorting.
$3 million?
Yeah. When you put on a play is when you feel like you know something that the world doesn't.
If you're right, then you make a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's the theory.
Yeah, but it's interesting. It isn't about truth, because you can be wrong. As long as the world changes their opinion to feel that what you perceive is true, even if you're all wrong, you still make money. So it's about the migration of their perceptions more than it is about the underlying truth.
Feels like you could be a shopper here a little bit.
Countries commit to an exchange rate in order to guarantee returns on investments in the domestic currency to foreign investors or to domestic investors. That guarantee is only worth how much money you have in the bank. And it's only worth the confidence, the trust you can instill in investors and speculators that you will have enough wherewithal to sustain your currency. If they decide you can't, you've had it, because they will end up getting you.
And the speculators call the bluff of the finance minister, who's saying this is a fixed exchange rate for all time. It's the pressure that the speculators put on, which says the markets don't think you can sustain it. Show us. Inflict pain upon the economy. Raise interest rates. Defend the currency that you say is so vital. That can go on so far, but a central bank might have $20, $50, $80 billion in a market that's daily volume is $600-700 million, and if everybody becomes focused on the same thing, $50 billion can disappear in an afternoon.
The inside moves of the global poker game are often put in play by decisions made in Washington. In April 1995, the U.S. Treasury would orchestrate an agreement, virtually unnoticed at the time, that would help ignite the Asian financial crisis. The finance ministers from the world's 7 richest countries, the global game's high rollers, would try to restart the long-ailing Japanese economy by ratifying a U.S. proposal to try to increase the value of the dollar against the yen.
Those countries in Asia, for instance, or some in Latin America, that decided, well, we can't play in that big poker game in the sky, so we'll just attach our currency to the dollar. And whether it goes up or down in relative value to others, we will promise investors that we're going to stick with the dollar. And that's basically a guarantee to U.S. investors. If you send your capital to our country, you won't be burned by a sudden change in currencies.
The Asian tigers, caught up in their own giddy growth, paid little attention at first to the move by the G7 high rollers.
The problem is that as the dollar appreciates, those countries without currency have to ride with it too.
The dollar began to rise. As it did, the Asian currencies pegged to the dollar rose in value too. And that meant the country's exports became more expensive in the global market. Sales began to fall, and deficits began to grow.
In early 1997, investors like George Soros and the hedge funds, who have a sharp eye for instabilities building in the system, focus on Thailand and begin betting that Thailand is going to have to devalue its currency because it's borrowing too much money. And so they start betting that there's going to be a currency devaluation at least, if not collapse. And of course, the fact that the big money starts betting against the currency often has the effect of fulfilling the prediction.
There's a very rational process going on in the financial markets. It goes kind of like this. I know I'm not that smart, but I know Soros is. So I'll watch what he's doing, and I'll go along for the ride.
Soros is shrewd and powerful, but he can't move the system by himself. His power is amplified because all of these major banks, the ones in Wall Street, the ones in London, Frankfurt, even in Tokyo, are putting chips down on his bet.
As the betting escalated, the Thai currency, the baht, literally came under attack.
Hey, Tony, all day.
And the Thai government was forced to buy more and more baht with the dollars it keeps in reserve, essentially paying off the speculators who wanted to cash out.
Mike, what can we buy? What can we buy, Mike, is my question.
Each and every one of those transactions is pulling money out of Thailand and bringing it back to the United States, putting downward pressure on the Thai baht.
And the Thai government has to then spend more of its reserves to prop the currency up, and eventually it reaches a point of exhaustion, and then you get a crisis of collapse. And that was the trigger for all of the events that followed. But it wasn't Thailand's fault. It was simply happened to be in the crosshairs first.
As the assault on the baht intensified, the government turned to the International Monetary Fund for help.
What was the name of the game for good doctoring at that point? It was to calm the nerves and prevent panic.
Jeffrey Sachs is a Harvard economist who has become a leading critic of the policies pushed by the U.S. Treasury and the IMF. He calls the IMF the typhoid Mary of emerging markets.
The IMF came in, as is their wont, and I think the U.S. rhetorically added to this. And the IMF took one look around Thailand and said, this place is much worse than anybody thinks. We're going to clean it up. 58 finance companies, we want you to close right now. All of a sudden, people started to look around and said, I don't know what's going to happen in Thailand in 1998, but I know in the second half of 1997, there's not enough to pay us all off, and I want to be the first one out.
What happens when a currency like Thailand's cracks is that everybody who didn't see it coming suddenly turns white with fear and runs for the door. I mean that almost literally. Their first impulse is to get out. Because they're all trying to do that at once, that drives the currency or the stock market or whatever down even further, more dramatically, and very quickly, in matters of hours or days.
On July 2nd, 1997, the government in Bangkok lost its battle against the speculators and ran out of cash. Within weeks, currencies tumbled, capital fled, and governments began to tremble throughout the region. First Malaysia, then on to Indonesia, and by the end of the year, South Korea. As in every financial panic since the 17th century, one investor said, greed had turned to fear.
The one problem that I said would not happen would be a generalized financial crash. Of course, I was dead wrong, but I think I may have reflected what most of us were thinking, and that is, yeah, there could be a lot of problems, but they would be confined to individual countries, or they would be problems of corruption, or maybe a revolution somewhere, but nothing like what happened when the problem in Thailand started to spread. That took everybody by surprise.
I think this is a time for confidence in the future of Asia and confidence in the future of our relationship with them. We have a few little glitches in the road here. We're working through them. And
the president tried to reassure the markets himself. But faced with a raging panic they had not foreseen and a jittery U.S. stock market, he and Treasury Secretary Rubin would dispatch the International Monetary Fund to lend the money to prop up the rapidly falling currencies. To secure the emergency IMF credit, the Asian governments had to agree to the economic remedies favored by Washington and Wall Street, including cutting budgets and dramatically raising interest rates paid to foreign investors.
They certainly came in there and demanded a level of immediate austerity, which threw these countries into a tailspin. And I believe personally, now this is, a lot of people disagree with me, that they asked these countries to do too much at one time. It wasn't just to get their monetary policy and their trade policy in order, or their fiscal policy in order, but they immediately started to ask for wholesale restructuring of the economies themselves. And while all of that had to be done, if you do it all at once, the social cost, the cost in terms of unemployment and the sheer human misery that is created, I think it was too much.
Sky-high interest rates might slow down the outflow of dollars, but they also crush domestic economies and turn once secure jobs into rubble. The jobless rate in Thailand would increase by 50%, and much of its budding middle class was thrown back into poverty. In South Korea, a country where being out of work is considered a stigma, nearly 10,000 people a day were losing their jobs. Tens of thousands took to the street in protest. In Indonesia, the free fall of the rupiah set off waves of panic buying. When the government signed a final pact with the IMF, riots erupted. Within a year, 80 million Indonesians were once again poor.
The voices of the markets, like the IMF, have become the villains of the markets. And, you know, if you go to Korea right now, and you talk to them about the bad year they've just gone through, they refer to it as the IMF time.